Hey everyone, welcome to the Opportunity Atlas segment of the Road to Equality initiative and meetings. And so I'll be spending the next 10 minutes giving a brief introduction of Opportunity Insights, which is the organization that I'm representing, and some of our main data tools that I think will be really useful for folks who are trying to alleviate problems of economic inequality. And so Opportunity Insights is headed by three professors, John Friedman from Brown University, Raj Chetty, and Nathaniel Hendren from Harvard University. All right, so just to begin, I'm going to give a brief background. So the motivation for Opportunity Insights and the research that we do is to try to solve the question of the fading American dream, mainly kids now born after 1980, compared to like 5 or 6 decades ago, only half are earning more than their parents. And so this idea of the American dream, the idea of, anyone being able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps doesn't really seem to be the case anymore. And so this widening inequality, that's the big question for us. And mainly, what are the sources? What can we do about it? And what are the potential solutions? So as economists, the main tool that we use is data, especially big data. And we analyze a bunch of outcomes and try to see patterns and trends over time to see where we can target initiatives. And then we also analyze a broad range of interventions, of those targeting childhood through adulthood, and try to answer these key questions in a very data-driven way. So a couple of examples of research questions, some which I will definitely dive deeper into since they're related to the data tools that I'll be presenting. So for example, a big one is neighborhoods. That's what the Opportunity Atlas is used for. And something that we're trying to look at is gentrification and place-based investment using the results that the Opportunity Atlas has shown us. Another one is higher education, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end. So the role of colleges and universities in propelling upward mobility, and mainly how we can measure it, which colleges are doing best. So the main data sources that I'll be presenting for the Opportunity Atlas comes from the United States Census Bureau, as well as IRS. So we've been very lucky in that we've had access to the census data of 20 million Americans through generations. And so we're able to link children to their parents and mainly track how children born to parents in the bottom quartile of the income distribution, how they do later in life. And we can follow them in the neighborhood that they grew up in and also the colleges that they went to. So just to start off, I'm going to be talking about the Opportunity Atlas, which came out a few years ago, and it's been one of the main tools that we use to identify neighborhood level inequality. So this is just a screenshot from the atlas itself. The main concept here that I'd like to introduce that we use to measure upward mobility is the average income of children at age 35 when they're born to parents at the 25th percentile. So parents who are earning $27,000 or less. And of course, this is all inflation adjusted. And the census data allows us to do that by linking children to parents through generations. And so just broadly across the country, we can see that upward mobility, there is very strong geographic patterns and variation. And so for example, zoning in on Baltimore, if your parent earned on average $27,000 when you grow up, on average, you're going to earn $28,000. And this is compared to places like, for example, Seattle. If you're a parent that's earning on average, you'd be earning $35,000. And so economic opportunity is very in different parts of the country. And that's one thing that the Atlas really illuminated for us. So this is just another scatter and analysis of different cities and looking at their job growth rate, as well as the measure that we looked at before, which is upward mobility. And you can see that in general, there is a negative slope. And over here, we have Baltimore, where over the past 20 years, there's been low growth as well as low mobility. Whereas cities that you can compare in the first quadrant has both high mobility and high job growth in the last 20 years. So now that all being said, one big question is, all right, how can we use this data? Where does it live? And so for that, I am going to turn to looking at the actual atlas itself, and I'm going to be spending the next few minutes going through that. All right, so this is a page that is going to takes a few seconds to load up, just given all of the images and vectors that we have. All right, so let's begin exploring. So the atlas, we try to make it as usable as possible. And of course, we always encourage feedback. And if you need help with anything, I'm going to be leaving an email at the end that we address all data concerns and questions to. So here is where we have the Opportunity Atlas, where the map is based off of. So I'm just going to go over a few key things in the map. So first down here, we have a guide. So that is the Atlas user guide, and that does a really great walkthrough of all of the different basic modes of the Atlas and what you can do. So in the Atlas itself, for example, right now we're looking at New York City, and New York City, here what we see the outcome as household income is the outcome for children on this panel. So low-income children, we define that as the 25th percentile for all races and for all genders. And so this means, of course, we can separate it out by both race and gender. So, for example, we can look at the results for Black males who are born to parents at the 25th percentile. And then you can see that now in New York, on average, you'd be earning $25,000. And so it's a lot lower. And then if you separate it out by white males in New York, it'd be $45,000. And so something that we found in general is, and there's a lot more research on it on our website, there's large inequalities and large income gaps between Black and white children, especially for males. And so that gap is especially large, even conditional on being born to parents at the same income percentile. And so here we have for white females born to low-income parents, and then compared to Black females born to low-income parents. And so here we have the toggles, and then you can look at different races, as well as different genders. So I'm going to toggle back to all children of all races born to low-income parents. And here we have a variety of outcomes. So this is just household income, looking at child household income. And so, for example, here we also have the incarceration rate. And the incarceration rate, again, this would be for low-income children. So all children born to parents at the 25th percentile, what is the average incarceration rate? So for example, in Jacksonville, Florida, it's 4.2%, compared to, let's say, like Watertown, New York, where it is slightly less than 1%. And here we have a range of outcomes, and we show them by the scale. And by outcomes, this is all kind of conditional on toggling the sample that you want. And something else to note is we also allow you to change what the color scale shows. So the numbers don't change, but just for ease, this will be toggling to everyone. So this compares to the whole nation, which so it would be the same as toggling to all income for children of all races and all genders. And so for here, if you talk between everyone and selected group, it would be the same. And so here it would just be comparing for all low-income children. And then on screen, that's because we also allow users to be able to move in, to zoom into, let's say, looking at specific cities or commuting zones. And so these are the outcomes conditional on being born at a certain income percentile or race or gender. So something else that we do is neighborhood characteristics. So for example, here at the commuting zone at the city level, we just have 2. So this is not conditional on selecting children born at like specific percentiles, since this is just a characteristic of the city, and we pull this from the census data, which is publicly available as well. So now we're going to zoom in on Baltimore. So specifically, let's look at Baltimore, Maryland. And then when you zoom into a place, now you can see everything at the tract level. And this is where the atlas really comes in handy, is that we look at the data at the tract level, so you can literally look at neighborhood differences just a few blocks away. And so here we have, areas of Baltimore that for low-income children living in those areas, where there's relatively higher mobility, so to speak. For example, here in the harbor front versus relatively lower mobility. So something else, for example, that you can really tell from the data is the history of racial segregation in Baltimore. So for example, for a lot of tracts, if we don't have enough data points, if there aren't enough children growing up of that specific background in that tract, then we don't have a data point. And so, for example, you can see that, along the harbor fronts, where it's traditionally like more affluent white families, we don't even have enough data points if we want to look at the mobility rate for low-income Black children, because there weren't any like growing up in that part of the city. And similarly, if you were to toggle to looking at low-income white children, you can see that even for low-income folks, there's a lot of racial segregation in Baltimore, just based on the fact that we don't have data for a lot of these different areas. And so, for example, something else that we can look at is the differences. One, looking at mobility for different races, but also looking at different genders. And I think one of the main uses of the atlas is being able to pinpoint which neighborhoods have higher income mobility for low-income kids and why that's the case. So of course, the goal is to be able to look at neighborhoods and say, hey, these neighborhoods have a higher income mobility. Why is that? And then being able to help policymakers see, where they should make investments. What about certain neighborhoods are allowing higher income mobility? And then, of course, what can other neighborhoods do in order to have the same place-based investment that would allow low-income kids to rise out of poverty? And so here, for example, another one is incarceration rate. And unsurprisingly, incarceration rate is heavily correlated with income mobility. And we found that in our data and a lot of the research that we've done. So this is something else that would be relevant to look at in the context of income mobility, economic equality. For example, for low-income Black males in the tract in downtown, the incarceration rate is 33%. Whereas just a couple of blocks away, it'll be much lower. And so the fact that we found the same level of variation in these outcomes within a city as we did across the nation for us was very surprising. but also just goes to show how different neighborhoods can be, even just within the same city. All right. So this is the Atlas user guide. And just as an addition, folks can also download all of the data. So first of all, you can take screenshots. So you can zoom in, play with the toggles, take screenshots to use in your own presentation as long as they're credited. And then you can also download the data, select which variables you want, maybe all of the variables, select which subgroup, and we can also do it by all the subgroup. And we have the data glossary, the full data sets, as well as the shape files that we use for the tract. So then that way folks can download all of the data that we've put together, make their own figures, do their own analysis. The goal is for this to be as open source as possible. And finally, I'm gonna go back to the presentation. I'm gonna go back to the presentation. So that is an overview of the Atlas. All right, so the next tool that I'm going to spend a little time showing is the economic tracker, which we've put together and we're still in the process of building. So the economic tracker is a real-time tracker of all sorts of economic indicators, including consumer spending, small business revenue, unemployment wages, and we've aggregated all of this data from a variety of private sector partners. So this includes MasterCard, Paychecks, Intuit, Burning Glass. So very different from using administrative census data, just because with private sector data, we have daily updates. And since with the pandemic, everything is moving so quickly, we found it especially relevant for folks to have the most updated data. And so this is where that tool lives, tracktherecovery.org. Let me just switch to that. So this is where it will take you. And just as a home screen, for all these indicators, we have them at the national, the state. For example, you can toggle a different state, the county. So this is within Maryland. And then of course you can choose which counties in which states you want to look at, and then at the metropolitan level. And so, for example, let's go to small business revenues. So for small business revenues, we're now at Baltimore. So overall, for small businesses in Baltimore, as of September 20th, 2020, they've taken nearly a 30% hit in revenue compared to the year before. So just for context, all of the series that we use in the economic tracker, in order to have some sort of benchmarking, we norm it both to January 2020, and then in order to take out any like yearly fluctuations, for example, if something specifically happened in a particular year, we then benchmark that again to 2019. So then here, really what you're seeing is the negative 30% is what it should have been compared to the year before and the beginning of the year. And we also provide all of the different stay-at-home orders and public school closings that's relevant to each state, just so people can have a context of when things happened. And so that is for total small business revenue. So here, this is looking at education and health services. Here, if we're to look at leisure and hospitality especially, has taken a really hard hit. So even now, it's down by negative 56% compared to what you would have expected at this time of the year. And retail and transportation has done slightly better, only taken a decrease of 4% of what you would have expected. And so something that we found in the papers that we've put out with this data is, a lot of low-income workers tend, especially those who are in leisure, hospitality, and like service industries, have taken also an especially hard wage cut as well. And so if anything, the result of COVID has really made inequality worse. And all those papers are available on our website. So this is looking at the small business revenue For example, for Burning Glass, we also look at job postings, seeing like how that's changed by the type of job postings that are there, by industry, and also by required education. We have unemployment claims, online math participation from Zhang. So this is just to look at how students are doing, but of course, schools kind of closed by May, and so that's where our data goes until. And of course, public health, which is COVID-19 cases. So this is looking at Baltimore. So 8 new reported cases per 100,000 people. So there was a spike in the summer, and now it's gone down. But it seems like, with the coming fall, it might be going back up again. And then time spent outside home. So this is definitely not as granular as the atlas, but it still provides a good context of breaking things down within the city, seeing which industries are most impacted, comparing it to other cities. So you can also compare it to other metropolitan areas, for example, Indianapolis or here in Boston. And here allows you to add charts. So if you click add chart, let's say I want the employment series, that way you can have, side-by-side comparisons. We also allow people to download the charts as well as download the data that we have as well. And that'll take you to an online repository where we store all of this data and numbers. Again, people can use it to do their own analysis, their own comparisons. And that's what we're hoping for people to do. And here on the menu, we have links just to introduce folks to the data documentation, describing what we do on the tracker, and similarly providing a user guide. All right, so those are kind of the 2 crash courses of the 2 big tools that we've really put out for public use, and we're hoping, would be as useful as possible to other researchers, to policymakers, to anyone who might be interested in looking at all of these outcomes. So I guess in the few spare moments we have, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we've actually used the data and these tools to put forward concrete policy proposals. And so we kind of have 3 pillars. So one is reducing segregation. So this is conditional, on government spending an X amount of dollars on housing vouchers. The goal is we want to help folks move to places that are as high opportunity as possible. So that's an initiative that we already started in Seattle called CMTO, Creating Moves to Opportunity. Now, of course, a natural question is, now that being said, ultimately you want to invest in these places. You want to look at neighborhoods where mobility is low and ask, why is mobility low in this neighborhood? What can we do for this neighborhood? And so that's still an ongoing branch of research. So the first one is, identifying places. And second, there's all sorts of projects that are going on with policy, with the econ research team side, to look at different factors and determinants. And then the last pillar is improving education. So the impacts of college on mobility. So this is, as we said, creating moves to opportunity. We've launched in Seattle. We're currently working with a bunch of other municipal governments as well, their housing departments, so that they can best allocate the funds that they're devoting to housing vouchers to help families move to high opportunity areas. And so next, I'm going to talk a little bit about college and upward mobility. So the 2 main things that we care about is access. Does a school serve low-income students? And second, success. So for low-income students who do attend the school, do they achieve economic security in the long term? Are they able to move up the socioeconomic ladder? And this is where we use the IRS tax data to follow students over 20 years. And so that data, we don't have a map for it, but what we do have is a data repository on our website. So our website is opportunityinsights.org, and we have a section called data. So under that section, not only will we be able to find the data that I presented in the Opportunity Atlas in table format, but we also have the data sets for college. and specifically, which colleges actually promote the best upward mobility, conditional on also providing access to low-income students. So, for example, elite colleges and universities don't do a very good job in terms of upward mobility, because even though they propel low-income students who do attend to the top percentiles, the access rate is very low. And so that would give them a relatively low score on the upward mobility front. And then finally, if there are any questions that folks have about any of the tools, the data sources, if we have any other data that we might help with in terms of education, neighborhood, socioeconomic inequality, please contact us at info@opportunityinsights.org. One of the research fellows is always manning the info inbox, and we're always really happy to help and hear from folks who might be interested in using the data that we have. So thank you so much, and feel free to contact the info inbox if you have any further questions. Thank you.